Late afternoon. The sunlight stretched across the two-lane road cutting through rural Georgia. Monica Trenton, a special agent with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, sat behind the wheel of her sleek black Dodge Charger, tapping her fingers lightly on the steering wheel. She had just finished a long day as a key witness in a high-level federal drug case. Exhausted, she just wanted to go home, but something wasn't right through the rearview mirror. Monica noticed a patrol car trailing her for the past 5 miles. No sirens, no flashing lights, just silently following. Instinctively, she kept her speed steady at the 55 miles per hour limit. She had encountered cops like this before, the ones who liked to assert their authority over strangers. Those who abused their uniform to manipulate the law, but Monica was no ordinary person. She knew how to handle them, and then, just as she had expected, the red and blue lights on the police car flashed to life. Monica sighed, staying calm as she pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. Turning off the engine, she placed both hands on the steering wheel, a habit she had trained other agents to follow in similar situations. Always stay calm, always stay in control, never give them a reason to escalate. 2 officers approached her car from either side. One was tall and thin, his sunglasses lowered slightly on the bridge of his nose. The other was bulkier, his brown uniform stretched tight around his stomach. Their badges glinted under the fading sunlight. The taller officer, his name tag reading Ryan Whitmore, tapped on her window. Monica slowly rolled it down. "Good evening, officer," she said, her tone steady. "License and registration." Whitmore responded curtly. Monica retrieved the documents from the center console and handed them over. Whitmore barely glanced at them before speaking again. "In a hurry?" "No," Monica replied firmly. "You didn't see the stop sign a few miles back?" Monica's expression remained unchanged. She knew for a fact there had been no stop sign. This was just an excuse to engage her, to find a reason to search her. "I don't recall any stop sign there," she said, her voice calm. Whitmore smirked. "Step out of the car." So it had begun. Monica remained relaxed, but her eyes never left the 2 officers. "For what reason?" "We'll discuss that once you're outside." Another vague answer. Monica knew exactly how this game worked. She took a deep breath, unbuckled her seatbelt, and slowly stepped out. Small rocks crunched beneath her boots. The second officer, Cole Barrett, circled behind her, his hand resting near his belt, close to his gun. "Turn around," Barrett ordered. Monica raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Whitmore stepped closer. "You've got drugs in the car, don't you?" Monica nearly laughed at the absurdity of the accusation. "Are you serious?" No one laughed. "I'm a federal agent," Monica said, her voice calm but sharp. "My badge is in my jacket pocket." But she didn't get a chance to reach for it. Barrett grabbed her wrist. Instinctively, she jerked away, breaking free from his grip. "That's assaulting an officer," Whitmore snarled, his eyes lighting up with satisfaction before Monica could say another word. Barrett yanked her arms behind her back and snapped the cold steel cuffs around her wrists. The metal bit into her skin. "Welcome to Wilkins County, sweetheart," Whitmore muttered, a smirk spreading across his face. They hadn't checked her badge. They didn't care who she really was. They already had a plan. Sitting in the back seat of the patrol car, Monica watched through the window as Whitmore and Barrett opened her trunk. Well, what do we have here?" Whitmore said, pulling out a tightly wrapped package as if he had just uncovered damning evidence. Barrett whistled. "What a shame," he said, shaking his head in fake disappointment. Monica didn't need to see it to know what they had done. They had planted drugs in her car, probably fentanyl or meth. Something easy to frame someone with. She clenched her fists. This wasn't a mistake. This was how they operated. Pick a victim, plant evidence, arrest them, let the system swallow them whole. But they had picked the wrong person. Monica didn't panic. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. She just sat there, waiting, because when a DEA agent goes missing, people come looking, and when they uncover the truth, these 2 officers will wish they had never laid a hand on her. The police car sped down the deserted country road. leaving behind a trail of dust and the fading hues of the evening sky. Monica Trenton, a seasoned DEA agent, sat in the back seat, her wrists tightly bound in handcuffs. She didn't struggle, didn't react, her eyes simply observed everything unfolding before her. In her mind, every detail was being analyzed, every move calculated. These officers weren't just making a mistake, they were predators with a purpose. She knew their type well, those who abused power to prey on the defenseless, but this time they had chosen the wrong person. Whitmore glanced at Monica through the rearview mirror, a smug smirk playing on his lips. "Hey, I know what you're thinking," he said. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can wiggle your way out of this?" Monica didn't respond. She only tilted her head slightly, just enough to show she was listening, but not the least bit intimidated. "I'm guessing you've been in the backseat of a police car before." Barrett, sitting beside her, sneered. Monica met his gaze in the mirror, her calm stare making his grin falter for a brief moment. "Of course," she said, her voice light as air, "but never as a suspect." Whitmore laughed. "Oh, trust me, this time you're not getting out of it." He emphasized each word, savoring his supposed victory. They had no idea this was only the beginning of a game Monica knew better than anyone. Wilkins Detention Center, where justice is twisted. The jail door creaked open with an ominous groan. Inside, the oppressive atmosphere was thick with the scent of disinfectant mixed with cheap coffee. A duty officer sat behind the intake desk, barely glancing up as Whitmore and Barrett shoved Monica forward. "Another drug dealer?" the officer asked lazily. As if this was just another routine case, Barrett tossed Monica's D badge onto the counter with a sharp clatter. "Fake D credentials," he said, "but don't worry, we'll take care of her soon enough." Monica looked at her badge on the desk, then at the officer. There wasn't even a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Clearly, this wasn't the first time they had pulled something like this. "Take her to a cell." Whitmore ordered. Her footsteps echoed against the concrete floor as they led her down a dimly lit corridor, the metal doors groaning open with a sharp screech inside the cell. A young man sat against the wall, arms wrapped around his knees, his tired yet wary eyes watching as Monica was shoved inside. The door clanged shut behind her. Monica took a deep breath. She wasn't the only one who had been set up. The truth behind the bars. The man stared at Monica for a moment before speaking. "You knew here?" Monica tilted her head. "What makes you think that?" He shrugged. "You're not panicking?" Monica smirked. "I have no reason to panic." He inhaled deeply. "My name's Darius. I've been locked up here for 3 days. No phone call, no lawyer. They said I was carrying a suspicious amount of cash, which was just my paycheck that I saved for 6 months." Monica clenched her jaw. "Let me guess," she said. "Whitmore and Barrett?" Darius let out a short, bitter laugh. "Who else?" Monica nodded. This story was nothing new to her. But this time, she had the chance to change it. Darius eyed her curiously. "Are you really D?" "I am." He raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here?" Monica looked at him, her eyes glinting with a quiet determination. "Because they don't know who they just messed with." Asterisk. Turning the tables outside the cell, Whitmore and Barrett were still laughing, believing they had won, that Monica was just another victim in their long line of setups. They didn't know that Monica's team had begun searching for her the moment she failed to report in. They didn't know that at this very moment, a D task force had gathered enough evidence to expose their entire operation, and they certainly didn't know that in just a few hours, they would be the ones in handcuffs, standing before a courtroom they once thought they controlled. When a D agent goes missing, it doesn't end with a mugshot and a false conviction. It ends with justice. Monica leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes for a brief moment, not because she was afraid but because she knew that right now, Whitmore and Barrett had already dug their own graves, and all she had to do was wait for the perfect moment to push them in. She smiled. The real game had just begun. "Here's the English translation of your text." Monica Trenton leaned against the cold wall, her eyes half closed. She wasn't worried, she wasn't afraid, she was simply waiting. A DEA agent doesn't just disappear without leaving a trace. And certainly, a DEA agent like her wouldn't let the bad guys win across the jail cell. Darius, the young man who had been arrested earlier, glanced at her. "You seem awfully calm," he said, his voice full of skepticism. Monica opened her eyes and gave a faint smile. "You don't need to worry," she replied. "I won't be here for long." Darius scoffed. "Everyone says that," he muttered. "But then they stay here for weeks, months." Monica tilted her head. "Not me." And she was right outside Wilkins County Jail. The lights from sleek black SUVs reflected off the glass doors. Federal agents stepped out, their demeanor firm, professional. One of them, a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit, walked straight to the reception desk. That was Raymond Holt, deputy director of the DEA. He pulled out his ID and placed it on the counter with just enough force to startle the desk officer. "Tell me," Holt said, his voice like steel. "Where is Monica Trenton?" The officer stammered, his panicked gaze darting to his colleagues. I don't know anyone by that name." Holt raised an eyebrow. "Really?" he said, his tone calm but sharp. "Then let me ask differently. Was a woman arrested tonight on drug trafficking charges?" The officer fell silent. A second later, his radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, we have the DEA at the front door. They're asking about an agent." A deadly silence fell over the reception area, then the screeching of tires outside shattered the tension. Holt glanced at his watch. "Let's go in." Inside the jail, Monica was calmly observing her surroundings when she heard a familiar sound, the screech of fast-moving tires. The chaotic chatter of radios. She smiled. "It's about time," she murmured. Darius looked at her, confused. "Time for what?" But Monica didn't need to answer. Outside, Whitmore and Barrett were in their office, smugly sipping coffee. When the door burst open, a team of DEA agents and U.S. Marshals stormed in. Their weapons holstered but their presence unmistakable. "Ryan Whitmore, Cole Barrett," Holt said, his voice firm but not loud, just commanding. "You are under arrest." Whitmore shot to his feet, his face going pale. "What?" he shouted. One of the agents stepped forward, pulling out a folder and slamming it onto the desk. "The charges against you include evidence tampering, abuse of power, human rights violations, and accepting bribes from criminal organizations." The agent announced, "We have bank records, surveillance footage, and witness testimonies." Barrett shook his head, trying to deny it. "No way." But before he could say another word, another agent grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back and locking it in cuffs, the same cuffs they had used on Monica. "Here's the English translation of your text." Monica Trenton leaned against the cold wall, her eyes half closed. She wasn't worried, she wasn't afraid, she was simply waiting. A DEA agent doesn't just disappear without leaving a trace. And certainly, a DEA agent like her wouldn't let the bad guys win across the jail cell. Darius, the young man who had been arrested earlier, glanced at her. "You seem awfully calm," he said, his voice full of skepticism. Monica opened her eyes and gave a faint smile. "You don't need to worry," she replied. "I won't be here for long." Darius scoffed. "Everyone says that," he muttered. "But then they stay here for weeks, months." Monica tilted her head. "Not me." And she was right outside Wilkins County Jail. The lights from sleek black SUVs reflected off the glass doors. Federal agents stepped out, their demeanor firm, professional. One of them, a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit, walked straight to the reception desk. That was Raymond Holt, deputy director of the DEA. He pulled out his ID and placed it on the counter with just enough force to startle the desk officer. "Tell me," Holt said, his voice like steel. "Where is Monica Trenton?" The officer stammered, his panicked gaze darting to his colleagues. I don't know anyone by that name." Holt raised an eyebrow. "Really?" he said, his tone calm but sharp. "Then let me ask differently. Was a woman arrested tonight on drug trafficking charges?" The officer fell silent. A second later, his radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, we have the DEA at the front door. They're asking about an agent." A deadly silence fell over the reception area, then the screeching of tires outside shattered the tension. Holt glanced at his watch. Let's go in. Inside the jail. Monica was calmly observing her surroundings when she heard a familiar sound, the screech of fast-moving tires. The chaotic chatter of radios. She smiled. It's about time, she murmured. Darius looked at her, confused. Time for what? But Monica didn't need to answer. Outside, Whitmore and Barrett were in their office, smugly sipping coffee. When the door burst open, a team of DEA agents and U.S. Marshals stormed in. Their weapons holstered but their presence unmistakable. Ryan Whitmore. Cole Barrett. Holt said, his voice firm but not loud, just commanding. You are under arrest. Whitmore shot to his feet, his face going pale. What? He shouted. One of the agents stepped forward, pulling out a folder and slamming it onto the desk. The charges against you include evidence tampering, abuse of power, human rights violations, and accepting bribes from criminal organizations. The agent announced, we have bank records, surveillance footage, and witness testimonies. Barrett shook his head, trying to deny it. No way. But before he could say another word, another agent grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back and locking it in cuffs, the same cuffs they had used on Monica. The courtroom was silent, with only the sound of papers being flipped and the rhythmic tapping of the judge's pen against the desk. The atmosphere was heavy, tense, like a storm slowly approaching. Monica Trenton sat upright at the defendant's table. But she was no longer the one on trial. Instead, she was the one in control across from her. Ryan Whitmore and Cole Barrett sat with their lawyer. They no longer had the smug expressions they wore when they arrested her. Now, they looked like two cornered animals, waiting for judgment. The judge glanced at the prosecutor. You may present the charges. The prosecutor stood up, adjusting his tie before speaking. Your Honor, we have charged Ryan Whitmore and Cole Barrett with abuse of power, evidence tampering, extortion, and severe violations of human rights. He flipped through a folder. We have undeniable evidence that they not only framed Agent Monica Trenton, but have done the same to many others over the years. Monica didn't take her eyes off the two officers, who now kept their heads down. The prosecutor continued. The victims were unlawfully detained, falsely accused of crimes they didn't commit. And worse, money seized from them mysteriously disappeared. He picked up another document and handed it to the judge. We have examined the bank accounts of both defendants. Thousands of dollars were transferred in from shell companies linked to a drug trafficking network. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Whitmore clenched his fists. The judge fixed a sharp gaze on them. Do the defendants have anything to say in the defense? Their lawyer stood up, his voice lacking its usual confidence. Your Honor, my clients were merely following protocol. They conducted their duties based on evidence they believed to be legitimate. Monica let out a quiet laugh, but loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. How interesting, she said, crossing her arms. I wasn't aware that protocol involved planting drugs in innocent people's cars and accepting bribes from criminal organizations. The judge slammed his gavel down. Order. He turned to Whitmore and Barrett. Do you have anything to say about these accusations? Whitmore lifted his head, his face pale. We were just following orders, he muttered, his voice shaky. Monica tilted her head, her eyes cold. Orders from whom? Whitmore remained silent. Speak up, she pressed. Or do you plan to stay quiet until you're locked in a cell? At that moment, Barrett stood abruptly, his voice trembling with anger. You think you've won? He snarled. You're just a DEA agent. You think you can take down this entire system? You think we're the only ones doing this? The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Monica simply smiled. Thank you for admitting that, she said. The prosecutor turned to the judge. Your Honor, I believe that says it all. The judge took a deep breath, then nodded. I agree. He looked down at the two officers, his eyes filled with disdain. Ryan Whitmore and Cole Barrett, I hereby order your immediate detention pending trial in federal court. Immediately. Two security officers stepped forward and handcuffed Whitmore and Barrett. No, "You can't do this," Whitmore shouted, struggling. "I'm a cop. I've served for over 15 years. Monica stood up and walked over to them. "And in those 15 years, how many times have you done this to innocent people?" she asked. Her voice calm but sharp as a blade. Whitmore had no answer. Barrett glared at her, his face red with fury. "You're not going to stop here, are you?" he growled. Monica shook her head. "No," she said, locking eyes with him, "because justice is not a choice. And I will make sure people like you never get to do this again, when justice speaks after the trial." Monica stepped out of the courthouse, taking a deep breath. The air outside felt much fresher than the suffocating atmosphere of the jail and courtroom. Deputy Director Holt was waiting for her at the steps. "How does it feel?" he asked. Monica gave a small smile. "Like a beginning," she said. He nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. "They won't be the last," he said. "You know that, don't you?" Monica turned back to look at the courthouse, where corrupt officers who once thought they were untouchable were now being taken away in cuffs. "I know," she replied, "but today, we taught people like them a lesson." Holt smiled. "So, what's your next step?" Monica stepped down the stairs, her stride strong and confident. "Next step?" She looked up at the sky, where the sun was beginning to set. "There are plenty more Whitmores and Barretts out there. I'll find them." Holt watched her go, shaking his head with a slight laugh. "You really don't know how to take a break, do you?" Monica only smiled because she knew, when justice speaks, no one can silence it. Monica Trenton stepped out of the courthouse, taking a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. She didn't just feel her own freedom, she felt the triumph of justice behind her. The metallic clinking of handcuffs echoed as Ryan Whitmore and Cole Barrett were escorted to the U.S. Marshal's vehicle. Their faces were pale, void of the arrogance and smugness they had displayed just the day before as they passed Monica. Whitmore's eyes burned with anger. "You think this changes anything?" he growled. Monica tilted her head slightly, offering a small smile. "I know it does," she replied, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. Barrett struggled against his restraints, but the federal agents held him tight. "You think throwing us in prison will clean up this system?" he shouted. "There are dozens more like us out there. You can't catch them all." Monica didn't argue. She knew he was right, but that didn't mean she would stop. "Maybe I can't catch them all," she said, her gaze unwavering, "but I'll take them down one by one." Barrett fell silent as he was shoved into the vehicle, and the doors slammed shut. Monica turned away. The battle wasn't over. This was only the beginning. A warning to the corrupt as she descended the courthouse steps. Deputy Director Raymond Holt was waiting for her. "Another case closed," he said, slipping his hands into his pockets, his eyes scanning her carefully. Monica smiled faintly. "We didn't just win this case," she said, her gaze following the transport vehicle as it drove away. "We sent a message." Holt nodded. "The question is, will anyone actually hear it?" he asked. Monica paused for a second before answering. "People like Whitmore and Barrett will," she said, "and they'll start to worry." She turned to Holt, her eyes sharp. "A corrupt system doesn't collapse overnight, but brick by brick, it will fall." Holt studied her for a moment before sighing. "Are you planning to take a break at some point?" Monica chuckled softly. "What do you think?" Holt shook his head with a knowing smile. "You really don't know how to stop, do you?" Monica didn't deny it. Because if she stopped, who would continue? Justice is not just for one person. Before leaving, Monica noticed a small crowd gathered near the courthouse steps. Locals, perhaps victims who had suffered under Whitmore and Barrett's abuse of power. They murmured among themselves, their expressions a mix of astonishment and a glimmer of hope. Darius, the young man she had met in the holding cells, stood apart from the crowd. He stared at her, as if struggling to believe what had just happened. Monica approached him. "You okay?" she asked. Darius shrugged. "I'm fine. I just didn't think they'd actually be taken down," he admitted, still sounding uncertain. Monica nodded. "Most people didn't," she replied, "until it happened." Darius studied her, deep in thought. "How long do you think this will last?" he asked. What do you mean? How long before another Whitmore or Barrett takes their place? Monica was silent for a moment before offering a small smile. Maybe tomorrow. She said, maybe next week, but at least today. We took down 2 of them. Darius chuckled softly. They deserved it. He said, thank you. Monica shook her head. Don't thank me. She said, thank Justice. Darius nodded. His eyes more resolute. Perhaps. After today, he wouldn't just be someone who waited for justice. Perhaps. He would become a part of it. No one is above the law. As Monica stepped into Holt's black SUV, she glanced back at the courthouse one last time. That place, where just this morning, people had thought she was the criminal. That place, where now, the real criminals had been exposed. The justice system wasn't perfect. It had cracks that people like Whitmore and Barrett exploited for their own gain. But each time someone stood up and fought back, a small piece of that injustice was chipped away. Monica knew there were more battles ahead, but that didn't matter because she would keep fighting. Justice was never an option, it was a necessity.